Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Or if you're on the West Coast, good morning. We're so happy to have you here with us today, and we know it will be a fantastic conversation with David and Carrie. As most of you know, the Barbara Bush Foundation is laser focused on solving our nation's literacy crises, which unfortunately impacts 54% of U.S. adults and their families. Low literacy is also inextricably linked to our economy, costing us $2.2 trillion in GDP, or 10% annually, playing a key and critical role in the enormous equity gap that exists in our country. Today's author, David Rubenstein, recognizes that connection too. In fact, at the 2020 World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, David commented that our country's biggest economic problems. David said, and I quote, "We have income inequality and a lack of social mobility, so that people at the top are doing well, but we have people at the bottom who are not really rising up. And of one good reason is we have a large problem with literacy." Well, David, we could not agree more, and you are absolutely spot on. We're thrilled to hear more of your views around this connection between literacy and the economy later today. David is not only a championing causes at the World Economics Forum, but he also serves as the co-founder and co-chairman of the Carlyle Group, one of the largest private investment firms. He's also chairman of the boards of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, the Council on Foreign Relations, the National Gallery of Art, the Economic Club of Washington, and the University of Chicago, as well as serving on many boards and many leading institutions, including my own alma mater, Johns Hopkins University. David is a leader in the area of patriotic philanthropy, having made transformative gifts for the restoration of our nation's most precious assets and landmarks, including the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Library of Congress. He's also an original signer of the Giving Pledge. David is host of 2 TV shows and author of several books, in addition to his latest, How to Invest, which we'll be discussing here today. David, thank you so much for joining us. And you're on mute, David. You're on mute, David.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you for coming. Okay.
Thanks, David. And here to lead our conversation today is Carrie Schwab-Pomerantz. Carrie is a passionate advocate for financial literacy and one of America's most trusted sources for financial advice. Carrie started her career at Schwab in client-facing roles. She currently serves as president of the Charles Schwab Foundation, leading the firm's financial literacy and philanthropic efforts. In 2023, Carrie will begin to serve on the corporate board of directors for Charles Schwab. Carrie is also a personal finance author known for her popular investing advice column, Ask Carrie, as well as 2 highly acclaimed books. Carrie also serves on the board of the Haas School of Business at Cal Berkeley, and she is national chairwoman of the Board of Governors for the Boys and Girls Club of America. Previously, Carrie was also tapped by 2 presidents, Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, to advise on financial literacy policy. And finally, we are thrilled to have Carrie in our own orbit. She is a member of the Barbara Bush Foundation's Investment Committee. Carrie, we're so glad that you could be with us today. So thank you again for agreeing to do this. And before we kick it off and I hand it over to you, I just wanted to let our audience know that we're going to have about 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A. So please think about your questions in advance and put them in the Q&A box. So with that, Carrie, over to you and David, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, British. And it's such a pleasure to be here and get the opportunity to talk to David. David, you've led such an incredible life, and I think we all have so much to learn. And also very excited to be supporting the Barbara Bush Foundation for family literacy, such an important issue in our country. So I want to get started because I think many of us really want to get to know you, David. At least I do. I want to get to know you better. And so I'm going to start with more of a personal question. Can you tell us more about your formative years and some of the people who shaped you or you most admired?
Well, I grew up in Baltimore. I'm the only child of two blue collar workers. Neither of them had graduated from high school. My father dropped out of high school to go into World War II. He came back. He met my mother. They got married at what seems to me like unseemly early age. He was 20 and she was 17. So it seems awfully young. If my own children wanted to get married at that age, I don't think I would have wanted them to do so. I grew up in a kind of segregated area in Baltimore. Baltimore was one where if you were Jewish, you lived in a kind of a Jewish ghetto. So I didn't really know a lot of people weren't Jewish until I was probably 13 or 14 or so. I would say everybody who is the unconditional love of their parents, and if you have one child, you probably get unconditional love from your parents, is clearly shaped by your parents. So I guess to whatever extent I've achieved anything, my parents have a major role in it. I did join a youth group in Baltimore that was led by a Baltimore City judge who kind of had a habit of organizing young kids in athletic and social and academic kind of programs. And his name was Judge Robert Hammerman, very impressive person, and probably he shaped me a bit as well. So those were kind of the influences I had. But of course, like anybody my age, I was watching Roy Rogers and Hopalong Cassidy and all the other TV stars of that era, and I thought initially I should try to be a cowboy, but I recognized that I didn't know how to ride a horse, so that wasn't going to work out.
Well, you're definitely kind of like a cowboy, right? You're a wild man. You do
Right.
a lot of stuff out there. So,
Well, I don't think I was made for riding. The last time I was on a horse, the horse that was named Molasses, and even that horse was too fast for me.
I know I don't think I love horses that much either. So I had my experience as a kid where you ran
Okay.
off with me, the horse. So, okay, so I think everybody wants to hear more about your book, How to Invest. Let me put it up here for everybody. You recognize it, David?
I do know that book. So I would say the essence of it is this. I tried to meet with and interview the leading investors or many of the leading investors in our country in different areas. So they could be private equity, venture capital, distressed debt, whatever it might be, and get their pearls of wisdom and then try to figure out whether there's any common pattern that they had, and then gave my own ideas of investing based on the 35 years that I've been a founder of Carlyle.
So what inspired you though to write it? I mean, you are a titan of private equity, so I thought it was, well, you do interview a lot of other people that you easily could be in the same chair. So what did inspire you to write the book?
Well, I got to the age of probably my late 60s and I had never written a book. And I realized, geez, I would like to leave something behind for my grandchildren or something, and maybe something that could be seen as a bit of a legacy. And so I started taking the interviews I've been doing and putting them in book form. I did one of the books, one on history interviews of historians I'd interviewed at the Library of Congress in a program that I host for members of Congress once a month. And then I did another book on leadership, some of the people I'd interviewed over the years on leadership, and well-known people in the business and financial world, and also in the sports world or academic world. And then another book on what America is all about and how America's been working to kind of live up to the promises of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. This one seemed natural to me because I have been in the investment world for so many years. And I knew all the people pretty much that I was interviewing. So it wasn't that difficult to do. And as anybody who's an author during the COVID period of time knows, you didn't have to go visit people in person because people will be quite happy to have you do the interview by Zoom. So it made it a lot easier to get the book done.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I have to tell everybody that it's a must read as far as I'm concerned. And, especially if you have any interest in investing, but I don't think you have to be an investing guru to read your book, but it really opens your eyes to, what large investors do, institutional, organizations, foundations, and so forth, and how they really participate and make the most really of the money a lot of times for everyday people. And I have to also tell you that I think I told you this before, that I'm giving 6 of your books away to my 3 kids and to my 3 nephews. And then I've sold a few along the way to friends. So hopefully you've seen a spike in sales.
Well, thank you very much. I should also
So-
disclose that I've interviewed a person named Chuck Schwab at one point. And he had a book that came out about a year or so ago. And it's a very important book in this sense. Obviously has a storied career. But what he pointed out was that he was not a gifted student in high school, got into Stanford, he would say, because he was a golfer.
Right.
Then, he just thought, I'm not that smart. And then one time, I think his 8-year-old son came home and the teacher said, your son has dyslexia. And he said, what's that? And then he realized that he had dyslexia, but they didn't know what it was when he, Chuck Schwab, was a student. And he, dealt with it. And I think dyslexia is something that is manageable. And obviously, many of the most accomplished people in our society have dyslexia. But I think it's very important to try to get treatment for it if you can, and deal with the importance of reading if you're able to do so. We have had some people in high office who've probably been dyslexic and didn't want to admit it.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And it kind of goes back to a lot of your investors who had things that, to overcome and who have become successful. And that's probably some of the drive to actually, to become successful. So you do, some of your investing advice and thoughts do remind me of my father. Speaking of him, you talk about investing being more than just making money, and how our investment decisions can be vital forces in our country for social and economic change. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, if you're an outsider, you'd say, what are people doing who are investing money? They're just trying to make more money. And who are they making it for? Themselves or other wealthy people or corporations or endowments. But the truth is, they're allocating capital in ways that I think helps the country if they do it well. So an example I cite in the book is that there was a venture capital firm in Boston that for 10 years devoted a fair bit of money to a young biotech company. And the biotech company in 10 years had not really come up with a single product. And then when COVID came, they came up with a vaccine for COVID. That company is called Moderna. So by allocating capital in a way that this venture capital firm did, they actually helped our country in many ways. So my point is that you should feel when you're an investor that you're not just making money for somebody else or yourself. You're allocating capital in a way that can help our country. We've had many great investors over the years who have built great companies, but they've done it by allocating capital in the right ways. And so I think people should feel that you don't have to go into the government to serve your country. You don't have to be a philanthropist necessarily to help your country. You can do it by doing your job well as an investor. And for that reason, I hope many young people will look at this book and say, maybe I should be an investor as well. It's a good profession and it's honorable and it can help the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're talking about is fueling innovation. And you're not right now, obviously, with ESG, environmental, social, and governance focus, and climate change. There's a lot of innovation going on as well. So you're absolutely right. So again, you're sort of the guru of investing. Private, again, mostly in private equity, and so I have to ask you a little bit of advice, if you don't mind. So in your book, you say that alternative investments are mainstream for portfolios being built for the long term. And that makes sense. I mean, again, all the investors in your book use private equity. And that was one way that they were able to get the alpha, do better than the market. But what about the rest of us? I'll call it the mass affluent, people who have maybe $1 million, $5 million, maybe even $10 million. How do they participate in private equity and get the same benefits that these bigger organizations have?
Well, for most private equity funds, they want $5 or $10 million minimums. And if you have 5 or 10 million, you wouldn't put it all in one fund. So there are registered investment advisors, they call them RIAs these days. And they are people who often will make available to an average person, or somebody has $1 million or $5 million, a chunk of a private equity fund, a piece of it. So you might be able to get in for 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, something like that. So you can do that as well. And they typically are RIAs that are affiliated with large firms that kind of vet these funds and do things like that. But for the average person, I think it's very difficult to be a professional investor if you're not doing it full time. And I think, and I say in the book, generally going into index funds is probably about the smartest and safest things you could do. You won't beat the market. You are the market. and you don't have to wait up at night and worry about something happening because you got smart people who are taking care of it for you. And also, you're going to be basically reflecting the market, which generally does reasonably well. Over the last 100 years or so, the S&P 500 has gone up on average about 6% a year, which is not so bad. And index funds that are fixed income probably go up 2 or 3% a year, maybe a little bit higher now. So it's not so bad to do that. And I think if you're going to be a professional investor, that's different. But if you're an average person who doesn't have the time to learn the stock market and learn about private investments, an index fund probably works pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also get the tax efficiency, because they're not
Yes.
trading a lot.
Yes, that's a very important point. Warren Buffett learned that a long time ago. When you trade things, you might make a profit, but you also have to pay a tax on that. And there are transaction costs. Warren Buffett has averaged a 20% return for 60 years in a row. 60 years on average, 20%. He did that in part by being very smart, but also by not selling a lot and not paying taxes and not having to deal with transaction costs. And so I think that's a good thing to do, is not have to sell all the time. And therefore, you have more money compounding for you for a longer period of time.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we all need to be investing in Berkshire Hathaway.
Well, it's done well. I would say he's done extremely well. Warren is now, I think, 91 years old. Whether he can replicate this over the next 91 years, I don't know.
Yeah. We'll have to see. Okay, so you may have sort of already answered this, but you, in your book, you asked several of your subjects, your interviewees, the question, and I think Kim Liu was one of them, if I remember right, and you asked them, if a young person came to you, your kid came to you, I'm going to assume early 20s or, maybe early 30s, and they just either won a lottery ticket or they just got a big bonus or an inheritance of $100,000. What would you tell this young person to do?
Well, a young person who is going to be in the not-for-profit world, let's say you're doing public service or philanthropic things, you probably might not want to take undue risk with your $100,000 because you're not going to be a professional investor, and the index fund probably makes the most sense. If you're going to be in the for-profit world, and therefore you're likely to have another 100,000 coming along at some point, I would say, take an area that you're interested in, read about it, learn about it, follow 1 or 2 stocks in that area or more, and basically make some investments, but make certain you read about the company. Don't just hear something in my scuttlebutt. Read about it, learn about it, and make sure you follow it, and make sure you get information. The key is getting access to information, how your investments are performing, and also making certain that you know what the fees are. The fees can be very high sometimes in investments that are small, and that could eat up your profits. So make sure you know what the fees are.
Yeah.
So that's some of my advice. I think it also depends on one's age. I have children who are in their 30s now, and they are all in the investment world. They're all in the private equity world. So they're different than the average person. But if my children had said they wanted to go into government service and $100,000 was going to be a lot of money for them, or $500,000, I would tell them to be very cautious, because they're not really going to learn the investment world, and therefore not have a chance to make up for some mistakes they might make later on.
Yeah. I have to tell you, my dad, when I was in my early 20s, I went and asked him for some investment advice. I just put my $2,000 in my IRA. And I asked him, what should I invest in? He said, Carrie, just pick 2 equity funds and you'll be fine. And of course, I was completely disappointed, David, because I thought he was going to give me the hot stock of the day.
Oh.
But of course, now that's exactly what I tell people. Like you said, index funds, participating in the market is really critical for anybody, to build wealth and have the life.
Not easy. Remember, when you're investing in the stock market, you're competing against billions of people around the world who are also buying stocks and selling them all the time. And the idea that you can outsmart all these other people all the time is not easy. And so an index fund is probably a safe thing. If somebody gives you a stock tip, that's a big problem, because you have to make certain a person doesn't have inside information, and inside information can be illegal. And so you can't trade on that. And so the best thing to do when you hear about a stock tip is go on and think about something else. I'm reminded by one person I interviewed in the book, one of the smartest investors in the country. He said, his name is Stan Druckenmiller, brilliant investor.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I never give anybody advice, because I like to change my mind every day about what I think is a good idea. And if I give somebody some advice, I don't want to have to call that person the next day and say, I changed my mind. So he just doesn't give advice because he wants to make certain that if the facts change, he can change his mind without having to worry that he gave somebody advice and now that person is doing what he previously thought was a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree. And also, you sort of remind me, and this is advice I give to young people all the time, is be really careful also about what you read, right? I mean, my kids, my boys, of course, they love Reddit, in that one page, it talks all about investing and so forth, but being really careful about those meme stocks and other things that just become popular out of the blue.
Yes, because, there are fads, you may know in California, there's been a lot of, it's like the center of the venture capital
Yep.
world, the tech world. I have a son who's in San Francisco and he does investing in tech and kind of things like that. But, he knows that these are very risky investments and you have to really know what you're doing and you have to be very careful. Everything that can go up can go down.
Right, exactly. Or you can lose all your money, depending on what you pick.
Right.
So, all right, so let's switch gears. Let's go in the area of your passion, philanthropy. So you're known for your commitment to what you call patriotic philanthropy.
Right.
So,
Well, go ahead.
can you explain what does that mean to you, and what are the contributions in that area that you're most proud of?
Well, you could say that all philanthropy is patriotic in some sense, because when you're doing philanthropy, you're helping the country. So
Right.
that's a phrase that I coined years ago. It may not be the perfectly descriptive phrase, and maybe if I could do it all over again, I'd come up with a better word, but it just came into my mouth and I uttered it. What I meant is philanthropy that reminds people of the history and heritage of our country. So if you say, I want to do climate change, well, that's a great thing to do, but it's not patriotic philanthropy in the sense that I meant. I meant things like when the Washington Monument has its earthquake damage and it needs to be repaired, I put up the money to do that. Or when the Magna Carta was up for sale and it was threatened to leave our country, I thought, even though it was drafted in England, it was influential in this country. One copy should stay in this country. There's 17 extant copies. So I bought it and put it on display at the National Archives. So what I often do is I try to remind people of the history and heritage of our country by buying historic documents like the Declaration of Independence, the 13th Amendment, the Emancipation Proclamation, and putting them on display. Or fix historic places like the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, Monticello, Mount Vernon. And so more people will go there. And the reason is this. We know what's in the Declaration of Independence. We know what's in the Magna Carta. We know what the Washington Monument looks like. So why does it make a difference if it's falling apart or if the document is just on a computer screen? Because the human brain has not yet evolved to the point where if you see the original of the Magna Carta, it's the same experience as seeing on the computer slide. Because when you see the original, you're going to be prepared in advance by reading something about it, most likely. You have a curator explain it to you. Most likely you'll read something about it when you go home. And so it's a better experience. And therefore, I think it's a way of educating people. We don't know much about history and civics anymore compared to the old days. Americans are very, very unfamiliar with our history in many ways and unfamiliar with the way our government works. The theory behind a representative government that was given to us by the founding fathers is that you have an informed citizenry. Well, if you don't have an informed citizenry, you're not going to have a very good representative democracy.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. And in fact, I was going to ask you what prompted you to buy the Magna Carta and the Emancipation Proclamation. So did somebody just come to you and say, hey, do you want to buy it?
I think the best things in life often happen spontaneously. Your father started his company and I've read his book, how he kind of happened by happenstance in some ways, serendipity. He didn't expect to do a business like the kind that he ultimately evolved into. Some things led to that. So in my case, I happened to be invited to a viewing of the Magna Carta. I didn't even know much about it. And it happened to be at Sotheby's. And then they happened to tell me they were going to auction off the next day. And the very clever curator said, by the way, it's going to go to somebody from certain foreign countries, which didn't seem like they should have the only private copy of the Magna Carta. So I just resolved in my own mind to do it. And I didn't want to tell anybody. It would sound presumptuous to say I'm going to go buy the Magna Carta the next night. But I did go back and buy it. And then one thing led to another. And I was surprised at how much attention it got. And I was surprised that, for example, when the Washington Monument had its earthquake damage, I knew the head of the Park Service. And I said, look, how long is it going to take to fix it? And he said, it'd take a couple of years to get the money out of Congress and all that. And I said, forget the Congress. I'll put up the money. And I didn't think it was that big a deal, but apparently got a lot of attention because people didn't think a private citizen would be doing that. The government should do it. But sometimes the government doesn't show up with the money that it should show up with. And if you want to get something done in life, sometimes you have to do it yourself. And so, I didn't hire McKinsey and say, how can I be a better citizen? How can I be a better American? It just happened by serendipity.
Well, you're a very thoughtful, strategic person, and hopefully you're inspiring a lot of philanthropists to do the same, because I totally agree with you about history. So here's another area that you care about, and that's education. I look at your bio. I don't know how you do it, by the way, on all the university boards you're on. You've written your books. You're a journalist, and then you've got British, who mentioned that you about your comments in Davos, and I watched that interview as well, where the journalists ask you, what are the biggest issues in this country, and I remember you said that the country's debt, which you said was we can get through that, but the debt was one of them. But the second one was low literacy in our country being one of the biggest problems, and that it affects equity and social mobility. And on a side note, the BBF, the Barbara Bush Foundation, commissioned a survey with Gallup that found that actually 53% of Americans have literacy at sixth grade or below, and that this is costing us over $2 trillion as a country. And you've alluded to that as well. And so what do we do about this? What can organizations like the Barbara Bush Foundation do to change this trajectory? Because it's such it's an issue that we really could and should take on.
Right. Well, Barbara Bush was a friend of mine, and her husband was a friend of mine as well. And when I spent some time with her, I learned much more about family literacy. When you hear about literacy, you often think about the importance of teaching children how to read. But what we now know much more than we did before is children learn how to read more from their parents than they do from anybody else. And so, or their parents or their guardians. And so if you have parents that are not illiterate or illiterate, functionally illiterate, they're not going to be able to teach their children how to read, and therefore they may not be good readers themselves when they grow up. So you really want to have parents learn how to, and adults learn how to read, so they can teach their children, among other things. We also know that if you are not a reader, you have other problems. Something like 67%, 2/3 of the people in the federal judiciary system or in the federal prison system are functionally illiterate. 80% of people in juvenile delinquency system in our country are functionally illiterate. So if you're functionally illiterate, you're going to have a problem probably avoiding crimes and getting involved in our judicial system and penal system. You're also not going to have a very good chance of making a good living. It's one thing to be dyslexic, and you can overcome that and you can compensate. Right. But if you're functionally illiterate and you don't do anything about it, it's very difficult to overcome that problem. And I think it's a sad situation. Now, I wish people would talk more about it when they run for office, because when people talk about how we're going to solve all our socioeconomic problems, they almost never talk about literacy, but they should, because that is one of the root problems. And nobody is against literacy. Everybody's in favor of it, but people don't seem to want to do much about it. At the Library of Congress, I initiated literacy awards, which we give out every year to people who promote literacy and do the good things for literacy. And I think I'm just a drop in a bucket, but we ought to do more for that. I mean, I wish Alfred Nobel would come back from the dead and create a literacy Nobel Prize, because that's one that was certainly deserving.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And when I first met British, she had told me that the high percentages were of low literacy in this country, and I was aghast. And that's why I joined her investment committee, because I do want to be part of that change and to help British and the team. Right. And anyway, we've got a lot of work to do, especially for adults. And I think that's what the Barbara Bush Foundation does.
Those statistics, I want to make it clear to people. If you are an immigrant to this country, let's suppose you come over from Ukraine and you speak Ukrainian, but you can read Ukrainian, that's not counted as functionally illiterate. It's people who can't read their own language as well as our English, but it's any language that we're talking about here. And it's a very high percentage of people in this country that are functionally illiterate.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. So going back to your philanthropy, you and several investors in your book signed the Giving Pledge, which the pledge is, I think, well, anyway, the giving pledge was a pledge to give the majority of your assets or your wealth to philanthropy.
Right.
So I would love to hear, what was the driving force behind your decision to sign it? And what would you say to others considering actually doing the same?
Well, here's what I'd say. First of all, philanthropy is a word that is derived from an ancient Greek word that means loving humanity. It doesn't mean rich people writing checks. You can love humanity with your time, your energy, your ideas. The most valuable thing you have is your time. You can't get more time. You can get more money. You can't get more time. So you don't have to be a billionaire to be a philanthropist. Unfortunately, we've bastardized the word by listing great philanthropists by only about the money they've given away as opposed to the time and the ideas and the energy they've given. So one, try to do something to make the country better, your neighborhood better, your state better, and you can do that with your time and your money as well. The Giving Pledge was created by Warren Buffett and Bill and Melinda Gates, and it was designed to say that people that have a net worth of $1 billion or more, they are committed to giving away during their lifetime or upon their death, at least half of their net worth. I didn't regard that as a big give because I came from very modest circumstances. My children are well educated. They all are on their own. I'm not sure that giving each of my children $1 billion is going to make them a better person. I think, you've dealt with this situation yourself. If your parents give you all the money in the world, then what motive do you have to do anything on your own? So my kids are well launched and I think they'll do reasonably well. Whether they make as much money as I did is not that relevant. So I want to give it away. And I think the key thing to do in my case is try to give it away while I'm alive, because I'm not sure I'm going to go to a place where I'll see where it's given after I'm dead. It's a voluntary pledge. And the reason I did it was I was going to do it anyway. We get together once a year. People talk about what they're doing with their philanthropy. And one of the most challenging things people talk about is, what do you do with your children? How do you get them interested in philanthropy? And what do you do with all the money you have if you don't give it to your children? And how much do you give to your children? That's a big challenge. How much money do you give to your children to give away? And how do you teach them about the value of philanthropy? I think the best way to do it is to lead by example. Do what you think is right, and your children will ultimately follow your example, I hope. And so I think it's, I put it this way, there's a selfish motivation as well.
Yes.
My view is that people who give away money or their time or their energy, help other people, are happier. Happier people live longer. Grumpy people don't live quite as long. So my theory is, give away money, you'll be happier, you'll live longer. And I like to say sometimes there's a special place in heaven reserved for people that give away their money and are philanthropists. Now, people laugh when I say that, but I say to them, why would you want to take a chance that I'm wrong?
Yeah. Is that bribery?
Well, you call it whatever you want. It's an inducement. But, I've done it because I came from very modest circumstances, as your father did. And, I got lucky in life. And so I now want to give back to the country that made it possible for me to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I counsel or mentor, folks here at Schwab, younger people, and philanthropy's changed my life. I didn't really get involved until like my early 30s when a friend asked me to get involved, and it just bloomed. It was almost like somebody took a lighter on my, pilot light and just blew it up, in terms of loving it. And so been very involved since. It enriches you, as you say, it's kind of selfish, enriches you, and you're with people, passionate, smart people that you learn from, as well as, obviously having the impact at the same time. Okay, so if you don't mind, I'm going to ask a couple more questions because I think we have time, right, British? All right, so I'm going to go back to your career a little bit, because I was really dying to ask this, and I'm sure you've been asked it many, many times. How does one go, so if you look at your bio,
right,
or your book, you talk, you're a lawyer at a prestigious firm, you work on the Hill, that seems, that makes sense. And that's a natural progression. But then you build one of the largest private equity firms in the country. And then you go to books, journalism, and philanthropy. So when I called you the wild man from the Wild West, how does that happen? It's fascinating. And I want to know what drives you.
Look, I was trained as a lawyer, and my interest in life was in politics and government. And I did that at the White House, but we lost the election to Ronald Reagan in 1980. So I had to go back and get a job. The only thing I knew how to do was practice law. nobody wanted to hire me because who wants to hire a Carter White House aide when Reagan is president? So I spent a couple months interviewing with firms. Nobody wanted to hire me. I didn't want to tell my mother her only child was unemployed. So I just said I had so many offers. I didn't know which one to pick from. But eventually she kind of figured out that wasn't true. So I took a job practicing law and I realized I didn't like it. You can't be great at anything or successful if you don't like what you're doing. Nobody ever won a Nobel Prize hating what they do. You have to love it. And I didn't really love the practice of law. I wasn't that good at it either. So I decided to try something different. There were no private equity firms in Washington, D.C. It was an infant, the industry was in its infancy, so I could get on more or less the ground floor. And then, so I recruited people that did have financial experience, not real buyout experience, but financial experience. They knew more than I did. They had MBAs. And we got lucky. And, as you know, 99.9% of companies that start fail. So we got lucky. We're the 0.1%, like your father's company that got lucky. Your father's company, like my company, had some challenges in the early years. I think from reading your father's book, and sometimes he wasn't sure his company was going to make it. And at times I wasn't sure I was going to make it. But we got lucky and we persevered and we did some things that changed our respective industries. So it was fluke. And many people look at me as you do and say, how did you do this? I got lucky. But in the end, you make your own luck. You work hard. You try to be responsible to people. You share the credit. You take the blame yourself. You try to do something that is a product or service that other people haven't really quite created yet, and do the best you can. I mean, but all you can do is work hard. Generally, as a rule of thumb, people that work hard do better in life than people that don't work hard, as a general rule of thumb.
Yeah, and that's, again, it's your passion, which I mean, it sounds like your passion. Like you said, you started as a lawyer, you started in government, and now you're do people call you a journalist? I don't know, what do I call you?
Well, an American, I hope, and just a person trying to do my job. I got lucky, and the best thing is that my parents. I often when I interview people on my TV shows, I often ask them, "Did your parents live to see your success?" Because I think one of the greatest pleasures in life is having children who are successful. Fortunately, my parents lived to their mid-80s, and they did seem to be reasonably successful, but they never quite understood how I did it because I wasn't trained in business and I didn't really have a business background. My mother said to me when I was starting Carlisle, she said, "David, please keep your law license because you need it to fall back on if the company doesn't work." So I'm still a member of the DC bar in case this doesn't work out. I have something to fall back on.
That's great. That's great. Well, what about, okay, so then going back to your books, because you do interview a lot of people. By the way, I'm married to a journalist. He when we first married, he was at the Washington Post, by the way. He was a sports writer.
Right.
Carrie Schwab-Pomerantz. He covered the Redskins and football and so forth. And he and Mike Wilbon were best of friends. I don't know if you recognize Mike Wilbon's name.
Sure, of course, he's a very famous reporter.
Yeah.
So are you going to you're going to buy the Commanders now?
Yeah, there you go. I don't know. He would like to buy a baseball team.
Well, I've looked at that myself too. The economics of baseball are not as good as the economics of football, but the prices are lower. But
yeah, well, that's his love. Baseball is his love. So when you're so in all your books, you're interviewing people. Right. What are you searching for in your interviews?
Well, when I interview somebody, I'm trying to get people to open up. You can always do an interview with somebody who doesn't open up and isn't really frank with you and doesn't really want to do the interview. So I try to interview people that I generally know, not always, and generally people who are willing to do an interview. I don't have to force them to do it. And they're basically willing to talk about their background, how they achieved what they did. What people like to read about in interviews is people's personal story, how they got where they are. They like to read about mistakes that people made and how they overcame them. They like to read about the humorous things that went through this person's life. That's what people are often interested in. And I think self-deprecating humor often works in these kind of interviews. But I try to loosen the peer person up, give them, a reason to think that I'm not going to embarrass them. I'm not Mike Wallace trying to find a gotcha moment. And generally it has worked out.
Yeah. How was my dad? Did he open up?
Your father did a really good job. The book was really good. I enjoyed the book. Your father, he didn't know me really, but I think he did a good job, and he was willing to explain, his mistakes, and I thought it was good. It aired on TV about a year or two ago or something. I don't know if you saw it, but I thought it was pretty good.
No, I got to go dig it up. Yeah, he sometimes has a hard time opening up, but he does. He absolutely does, and he is self-deprecating. as well. I mean, he knows his mistakes, Ashley, as being not only as a business person, but as a family man. He's very open about that.
Oh,
So.
he has a challenge that the rest of us don't have. His face is so well known and the name is so well known that you can't go get a restaurant reservation and say, I'm Chuck Schwab, you have the table for me, because everybody's going to know the name. So, it's a little more challenging when everybody recognizes you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you one last question, then I'm going to hand it over to British.
All right.
So what's next? What's your next big project?
Well, I have spent most of 2022 filming a 8-part series for PBS on iconic American symbols, things that that kind of represent some parts of America. Symbols are things like the Statue of Liberty, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Hollywood sign, the American cowboy, Fenway Park. And I've done an in-depth kind of review of these things by talking to the people that help make these things work and to know the history and so forth. And I think it will be airing in April and May of this next year. And that's one project that I've been working on for most of this year. I'm working on trying to do another book. I haven't quite figured out exactly what to do, but I hope to get another book done in 2023.
Around history, or?
I hope to do maybe a history book. I've talked about maybe an entrepreneurship history. I've also, one history book of what I'd like to do is an interview of people that are no longer alive, because, we don't have interviews of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Cleopatra. So I try to figure out whether I could do an imaginary interviews and kind of what they would say about life, because the interview format that we're now engaging in is a relatively new format. It didn't exist before. So there's never was an interview of Abraham Lincoln, never was an interview of George Washington or anybody. So it'd be great to be able to see what these people would say in a kind of interview format. And I'm thinking about something like that.
Yeah, well, you certainly have done enough reading that you probably could answer for them.
Well, I'll get experts, or maybe I'll see what I can do. But anyway, I'm trying to do, the most important thing is this. I had my annual physical this morning, and the doctor couldn't find enough things wrong with me to make me think I'm going to drop dead anytime soon. So but as you get to be older, the most important thing is staying healthy and staying alive, right? Yeah. And so as you get older, you always worry about people who are your age or younger dying. And, you never know, something bad can happen, very quickly. So I try to do what I call sprinting to the finish line, getting as much done as I can before my time is up, and not just galling around and just waiting for something to happen. I just want to get things done. Yeah.
Well, I hope you're giving some time to yourself, maybe a little exercise here and there.
I have a lot of exercise equipment, and my theory is if I walk past it from time to time by osmosis, it will rub off on me. I don't know if that works. My doctor doesn't think so, but I'll try to do a better job.
My father-in-law said he used to use the bike as a place to hang his clothes.
Well, so I have that attitude too, but okay.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, British, David, it was really wonderful to
thank you for doing this.
And
thank you for
taking
fun. Are you in San Francisco now, or where are you?
Yeah, I'm in San Francisco. Well, it was our headquarters. We just moved to Texas. So
I am familiar with that. Okay.
Yeah, but we still have a big office here. So I hope, I hope our paths cross.
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and British, do you want to take it over? I know you wanted to open up to questions for David.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Carrie, and thanks, David. David, first of all, I just want to thank you personally. We received your award from the Library of Congress last year, and we're very, very proud of it for a 20-year-old program that we've been doing. So thank you for that. David, you are so humble when it comes to many of your investment opportunities that you quote say you missed, such as Facebook, Netscape. Are there any investments that you're particularly proud of or that meant a lot to you, for whether they were a home run or maybe they were a miss? Could you share some of those thoughts with us?
Well, the ones I'm proud of, Carlisle, over the years, in our corporate investments over 35 years, we've averaged a 26% rate of return, gross internal rate of return. So that's good. I'm proud of that. I can't say I'm responsible for it. We have other people that really did it, but I'm proud of that. And I guess I'm happy that my children all have their own private equity funds. They seem to be doing pretty well. So maybe you could say that's a good investment also. But I'm also proud that my family office team had a chance to look at FTX recently, and they passed on it. So I'm proud that they made that decision, because that would have been a bad investment.
Yeah, clearly. Right. David, I'm going to switch gears. Another possible piece of advice, ESG, is the hot thing right now. Lots of contributions, lots of conversation around that space. From your perspective, ESG contributions, will they be valued as highly as their financial performance, one, and two, how can we consistently measure ESG performance, and could ESG performance become licensed to operate for companies?
Well, as you know, we have an ability to measure profitability quite well and how a company's doing. We have ratios. There's a Sharp ratio, there's a PE ratio. And so by using a number and attaching a number to a company, you can tell a fair bit about the company. We don't have the same kind of ratio or number that's equivalent in the ESG world for a company. In other words, if you look at these stock tables, you don't see IBM ESG number 10 or number 6 or whatever the ratio might be. So at some point over the next couple of years, I suspect there'll be an ESG ratio or a number that everybody will recognize in time is an indication of how good that company is in that area. I think ESG is under assault right now. As you may know, it's seen by some people as a symbol of political wokeness, and therefore people are reacting against it. I think it was the state of Florida. I think it was the state of Florida that just pulled money out of BlackRock because they thought BlackRock was too woke. I may have the state wrong, but I think there was the essence of it was that's what's happening. So you're seeing getting more and more people are upset about ESG because they think it's leading to wokeness and therefore maybe not creating enough jobs, whatever the reason is. So I do think ESG is a bit under attack.
But you think we'll get past it? Maybe
Well, ESG makes a lot of sense, and we are a gigantic leader in that area at Carlisle. I do think it's important that people pursue those kind of causes and those kind of principles, but I recognize that there are people who are fighting back now against it.
Sure. So switching gears a little bit, David, what of all your philanthropic work, is there one single gift that you're most proud of?
Well, the one that's probably gotten the most attention is fixing the Washington Monument, though it wasn't that big a gift, relatively speaking. And then, the Magna Carta gets a lot of attention. But I went to college and law school on scholarships, and I've given a lot of scholarship money to Duke University, which gave me a scholarship, a lot of scholarship money to University of Chicago. And, whenever you have and I've given a lot of scholarship money to other universities as well, whenever you have a student that has your name on it, on their scholarship, you're proud of what they achieve. So I'm always interested in seeing what the achievements are, people whose scholarship I've provided. For example, in the District of Columbia, I've funded for the last 11 years a scholarship program that gives scholarships to the best high school students in the District of Columbia. And many of them have gone on to do quite well. And so I'm always proud of scholarships because that can really make a difference, probably more than almost anything else I can do with some of my money.
Absolutely. It's terrific. So David, you said this earlier, but we've got a couple of questions on this. So I'll ask you to somewhat repeat it, but if you had one piece of investing advice for a new college graduate, what would it be?
Don't move foolishly. Make sure you know what you're doing. Read about what you're about to do. Don't lose more. Don't risk more money than you can afford to lose. Try to experiment, but don't take undue risks, and make certain that you understand the fees involved, the risks involved, and ask people who are intelligent and informed about investments what their advice is as well. But in the end, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't risk more than you can afford to lose. And I would say try to enjoy the investment world. It can be very enjoyable.
I can
Wonderful.
add to. I'll add to that, if you don't mind. I would say somebody in their 20s, start saving at least 10% of your income in your retirement account. Hopefully you have a 401k with a match. A match you can't, that's doubling your money. So you can't get that kind of return. Even Warren Buffett can't. So take advantage of it and not only save in your retirement account, but invest. And David, you talked about ETFs
Right.
and equity funds. So, that's good advice.
Yeah.
I
Carrie,
agree.
maybe just to follow on to that, what's your number one piece of advice around financial literacy, particularly for women? Young women typically, say, I don't understand this, or my dad helped me with this, or whatever. What do you say to those young women?
Yeah, well, let me, I'm just, if you don't mind me passing some, or referring to a study that we did that showed that parents talk to their daughters differently than their sons when it comes to money. David, it doesn't sound like you did that, but a lot of parents, when they talk to their sons, they talk about investing, estate planning, debt, but with their daughters, they talk about savings and household expenditures, which is very important, but that's not how you build wealth over time. And so it's no wonder when women, go out into the work world, they're a little bit behind on the knowledge. And then of course, women earn 80 cents on the dollar as well. So it's even more important that women really, take the bulls by the horn and learn. And it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be super intense, but start to learn and even get help. There's no shame in getting help from a professional. Stay away from the Reddits. Go to a professional.
That's great. David?
Well, I agree with that. Our situation in our country is that women have been treated differently from the beginning. They weren't given the right to vote. They weren't given the right to own their own property if they were married. It wasn't until 1920 that they got the right to vote. When you think about it, wasn't that long ago. And we have a situation today where, for example, I interviewed somebody this week, Roz Brewer. She's the CEO of Walgreens. She's one of only 2 African-American women in the entire country who run a Fortune 500 company. So 500 Fortune 500 companies, only 2 are led by African-American women. So, we have a long way to go to get women and people who have diverse backgrounds into leadership positions. Now, fortunately, business schools now are roughly 50% female. And so in time, it will show up in leadership positions. But in my generation, very few women, relatively speaking, went to business school.
Yeah. David, you're an incredible American and patriot, and we know you were dear friends with President Bush and Mrs. Bush. When you talk about informed citizenry, literacy is core to that. You talk about service. They were both all about service and serving our country, and love the way you frame investing as part of helping your country. I think it's a beautiful philosophy and ethos, and thrilled that you were able to share that with all of us today. Can you share some special memories or favorite memory that you have of President and Mrs. Bush, since you did spend a bit of time with them?
I went to Kennebunkport at least once a year and spent some time with them. Also, on many things, I would travel with them around the world, and I got to know them. And I would say President Bush was probably the nicest man I ever met in my life. Not the nicest former president, but the nicest person, and that's this man I ever met. Just an incredible, gentle soul, and who had a great sense of humor. Was always, thinking about jokes and so forth. Barbara Bush was really dedicated to literacy. That was her gigantic cause, but she had a really great sense of humor and a pretty sharp tongue as well. And she'd let you know what she would think. So I think that together they were an incredible couple. I think they were married for more than 65 years. And it was, incredible. I like to say to them, I think at their 65th or 60th wedding anniversary, it was held at the White House. And I was asked to speak at it. And what I said was that I was responsible for President Bush becoming president, because I worked in the Carter White House and I got inflation to 19%. And as a result, we got kicked out, and Ronald Reagan became president and George Bush became vice president. And because he was vice president, he later became president. So if I hadn't gotten inflation so high, you might never have heard of George Bush. So he appreciated what I had done for his career.
I love that. That's great. Well, a family that loved this country so much as you do, David, what are your greatest, just to sort of close, because you've invested in so much in your country, and and they both did as well. What are your greatest hopes or fears for our country at the moment? You talked about an informed citizenry. Would you want to share with us before we close sort of your thoughts on where we're going, particularly your hopes, not just what may be a challenge or a fear?
Well, when the country was created, people talked to each other. There were, some 59 people at the Constitutional Convention. They all talked to each other. They didn't refuse to talk to each other. I think the founding fathers, if they came back today, will be shocked at how Democrats and Republicans don't socialize with each other, don't talk to each other, and don't compromise very much. When I was in Capitol Hill and the White House, a good legislator was somebody that could work out a bipartisan compromise. Now, a good legislator is somebody that makes certain he or she raises as much money as possible from the far left to the far right and doesn't try to compromise. That's a sad situation. I'd say about President Bush, I said about him once, and I think it's true. If you were going to have a new Constitutional Convention, think about the Constitutional Convention we had with 59 people. They were all white males who were property owners and were Christian. Nobody Jewish was allowed to be there. No women were allowed to be there. No African Americans were allowed to be there. So presumably, if we had a new Constitutional Convention, which is permitted under our current Constitution, who would be there? What kind of people? Who would you want? Well, the kind of person you would want would be George Herbert Walker Bush. He would have been a perfect person to be a delegate to a new Constitutional Convention because he's civil, smart, get along with people, and had the kind of ethics that you really admire. And I would say, you know, on the other side, Barbara Bush also would have been a very good delegate to that convention. She reminds me very much of Abigail Adams because Abigail Adams is very direct, very pointed, and had, you know, a lot of influence on her husband. I think Barbara Bush did as well. So they're both people would have been excellent to be at another Constitutional Convention if we ever had one.
Thank you for that. They both surely left legacies, and I'm honored and humbled every day to be able to carry on Mrs. Bush's legacy. So with that, David, this has just been really terrific. Again, we're so honored to have both of you.
Thank you very much. My pleasure, and thank you. All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Bye.
Carrie, everybody can find you on on Schwab.com and the BarbaraBushFoundation.org. Thanks again, and happy holidays to everybody.
Bye.
Take
Happy
care.
holidays.
Bye.